So super excited to be here tonight. So Food Stories is part of the York Region Food Network Food and History through a BIPOC lens program. BIPOC refers to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so this project is sort of an evolution. It's been an evolution from our Newcomer Kitchen program, and it's sort of evolved into this space. We wanted to look at the histories and the culture of from people who, we don't often hear about. Living here in Canada, we often see things through a very Eurocentric lens, but we know that the stories run much deeper and are much more, they're just richer than just that one perspective. So we wanted to start this program in order to highlight all these other cultures and to learn more from one another. So I welcome you. So my name is Maxine Knight, and I am the Culinary Program Director here at York Region Food Network. So I've met some of you before, and so for those of you who are new, we just welcome you to come. How we came about this particular food story is it's just very interesting. As we started looking and wondering, as I started questioning just more about what are the stories that are found here in Canada, I myself am from Caribbean descent. My family is from Barbados. And so I understand what sort of that means. And our food culture goes back to about 60 years. So from the late 50s or mid 50s, up until the mid-50s, immigration to Canada from the Caribbean wasn't something that was really readily open. And so in the mid-50s, there was something called the domestic program that was opened up to folks living in the Caribbean islands. And so what that was women who were between certain ages, I believe it was 18 to 35, were allowed to come to this country, but only to work as a domestic, so working for others in other people's homes. And so, and after a year, they were able to apply for immigration status. And then at that point, you could sponsor family members to come and join. When I was looking at it being February and it being Black History Month, as I was looking at what does Black Canadian food culture look like, I had a hard time finding what that was. So because the history in which I'm personally familiar with, it only goes back that sort of 65 year period when immigration from the Caribbean was something that was just starting, and then a more of an influx of folks joined, and from that continent of Africa were able to come to Canada after that period. But I know that history in Black history or African Canadian history is much longer than 65 years. So we know that because there were loyalists who fought in the Civil War in the U.S. from the U.S. South and were brought to Canada. And I know they entered through Nova Scotia. And so there's a whole rich culture that dates back hundreds of years in Canada of African descent, of folks from African descent and communities here in Canada. So that sort of just had me questioning. It's okay, well, what is this? When we look up and we search up Black history, especially around the idea of food and culture, oftentimes we run into spaces that are from the American South. And that's sort of the narrative that is more broadly understood. So I was okay, there has to be more. There has to be more. What is this culture? And especially myself, like I said, being of Canadian descent, but I'm first generation Canadian, I have a son. And so my son is going to be second generation Canadian. So what does that mean to him? What is that culture to him? Is he going to be looking into our cultural past and from Barbados, or is there something that's already existing here that he can also be a part of? So with that question in mind, and it being Black History Month, I wanted to find a way to showcase what is African Canadian food like? So, and what is that history and what is that culture? So, with that question in mind, I hit the old internet, Miss Google, as I like to call her, and I searched up, and I was just looking, okay, what is this, and what can I find that kind of fits in this description? And so I did come across this wonderful article written in 2018 in Savar magazine, and it was with our guest for the evening. Her name is Wendie Wilson. And so in that, she talks a little bit about the cultural heritage of African Nova Scotian food, and just talking about how it does date back for over 400 years, when communities, when the African communities started migrating to Canada. So I thought that was super interesting, and I wanted to explore that a little bit more and to find out if Wendie could shed some light on this topic. So I sent her an email, and I found her. She's part of the Nova Scotian Freedom School. So she's part of educators who have opened up the school to talk about Black achievement, Black accomplishments, and Black culture from a Canadian perspective. So I was very excited when I saw this. I sent her an email, and she responded like the next day, just super excited as I was to have this discussion and to share more about the history of African Canadian food from a Canadian perspective. The one thing that I found really interesting about it, though, is there's a lot of similarities between Caribbean food and also sort of that Southern United States food. So I thought that was quite interesting. I saw that she had oxtail and fish cakes, and these are things that we find in our Caribbean culture like all the time. And then there was like a little bit of like sort of African influence in there, but then there was amazing things like cornbread and baked beans. And then there is also things that are very common within like the Canadian East Coast. So there was like boiled dinner. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. This is a whole mishmash of amazing cultures all kind of smashed together. But ironically enough, though you can see all these influences, there's very little that I was able to find that actually talked about what is Black African Nova Scotian food. Like, what is it exactly? So luckily for me, when I reached out to Wendie, she was totally on board and willing to come on here today and to share this story and her culture and her heritage with us today. So what you can expect from today is I will be introducing Wendie shortly. You can probably see her busy in her kitchen there, getting ready. I will introduce Wendie. We'll just have like she'll do a nice introduction, and then she's going to show us some things that she's been busy preparing in the kitchen and share a little bit about the culture. This is an exciting topic, so we do want you to save all those questions that you might have. And there's going to be a space. We left a nice chunk of time towards the end of our workshop today where we can just kind of like answer questions. And so we'll open up the floor for folks to be able to ask their questions if you want to get more information. So what you can do throughout the conversation, if you have any comments or anything that you want to make, you can type them in the chat. And if you just want to make a comment, and then Christina will read them out later on, or you can hang on to them towards like the end, and then you can start typing them in the chat. So we'll save those for then, because I think she has so much to share, and I'm sure we're all really excited to learn a little bit more from Wendie. All right, so that being said, I'm just going to welcome our guest, Wendie. Wendie has a Master's of Education in Afrocentric Leadership. She currently works as a public educator and is an artist, a writer, a womanist, I like that term, and a lover of community and culture. She's born in Halifax and raised in the inner city, and she's a descendant of Black Loyalists. So there's a lot in there, and I'm really looking forward to just unpacking a lot more of Wendie's story, and to hear more about the culture from Nova Scotia. So Wendie has something yummy happening there in the frying pan, but I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, and I'm going to say welcome to Wendie, and she's going to unmute herself. Oh. There's always technical.
There we go. I wasn't able to unmute. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. So nice to see you. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
All right. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone to my kitchen. I'm just frying up.
All right. So, oh, what do you have there? Sorry.
Some salt cod fish cakes that I was just frying up.
Okay. So that's interesting. Okay, so you have salt cod fish cake. So again, our cultural background is from Barbados, and so fish cakes is something that's super, super common. The salt cod fish cakes. You can often find folks out like sitting on the side of the road with like their oil drum, and they're just like deep frying these fish cakes. So Wendy's getting herself sorted. So I'm curious for you to tell us what are yours like? What are the fish cakes that you all make? What are they like?
So the fish cakes that I'm making are traditional, like a maritime fish cake, and very simple ingredients.
Okay.
Salt cod, which I soaked last night, and then you rinse it a couple times, kind of according to the saltiness you want. And you gently boil that, and then you add some boiled potatoes, which you mash in with the flaky salt codfish. The other key ingredient for our salt cod fish cakes is summer savory.
Okay.
So I always have summer savory, the traditional ones, a little bit of pepper, and then white onion. And then I refrigerated them just so that I could work with the batter better, and form them into patties. And I'm just frying them up right now.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're much different from the ones that we make in Barbados. So the ones that we make in Barbados, we also have like the salt cod. Again, same thing. It's soaked and then just gently boiled to remove the excess salt. But it's mixed with like onion, garlic, thyme, Scotch bonnet peppers, and then it's baking powder and flour. Okay. And they're made into fritters. So they're actually brown balls that are like deep fried. Are yours more pan fried, or are they deep fried as well?
These are pan fried, and I traditionally fry them in a cast iron frying pan and brown them on either side. And now I just have them warm. I'm going to make up another batch in the next few minutes. But they're very simple, and they're hearty, and it's something that people have eaten here for hundreds of years, of course, before refrigeration, or before people, had the convenience of having a refrigerator in their home. Dried and cured meats, dried fish, cured meats were something that people relied on to survive, especially over the winter, because it gets really cold here. No,
absolutely. So I'm curious. So are these fish cakes? Are they the same that you would find any place else in Nova Scotia? Are they all made with salted fish, or are they made with fresh fish as well?
Sometimes you can make them. Sometimes people, I know I've had them with like fresh haddock, but traditionally this is something that you'd find in like big in Newfoundland, big in Nova Scotia. Obviously something that we adapted, probably because it felt familiar to us. Like, are people coming from the continent, the motherland, Africa, coming from the Caribbean, and just it's something that felt very familiar. So we immediately latched onto it and have kept it very simple. Like I said, salt cod, potatoes, white potatoes, summer savory, pepper, and then I dredge them in some flour and tiny bit of salt and pepper, and fry them up. Simple.
And then that's it.
We love them in Nova Scotia. If you don't make them often, it's usually something that I will make if my family's coming over. I'll make up a big of fish cakes and baked beans, which I have here. I just pulled them out of the oven. And my older sister Gail just walked in, and my oldest brother and sister are here. So they're, you hear anything in the background, if it gets too rowdy back there, let me know.
Well, they heard you were cooking, so it seems like they all made their way over.
Well, this is a small gathering only because, of course, COVID, and our numbers are really low here in Nova Scotia, thank God.
Yeah.
But normally there'd be 30 of us in this space.
Okay, so that idea of are these fish cakes, the idea of it being like a celebration or a gathering food, is that generally when it's enjoyed?
It's when family kind of gathers around and you need to feed a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you make up a big batch of baked beans. I have some cornbread in the oven right now that I just whipped up, and and some green tomato chow. I forgot that. That's something that you traditionally find as well as a condiment.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about the green tomato chow? Like what is that made from?
So the green tomato chow is something that I've never made myself, but something that I've grown up with. And in every family, you have that aunt or two or cousin who does the preserves. That will, in the fall, will harvest the ingredients needed to, keep you through the winter. And one of them is, we call it chow chow. And it's something that I never made, but we had growing up because my aunt Irene would all their, pickled beets and chow chow.
So is that idea of sort of like harvesting and preserving, is that something that's like particular to the African Nova Scotian community?
I think it's something that's like common in Nova Scotia, just because the winters are so cold here, and you're not able to, forage things in the winter. So quite often people will take the time, whether it's strawberries. We have this is the capital or blueberry capital. I think maybe even the world. I don't know. In Nova Scotia, but we eat a lot of blueberries, and that's you'll find that was one of those things that sustained people as well.
Yeah.
They were free. You send your kids out to collect them. Luckily, I grew up in the city, so I did it for pleasure. But my cousins that live in the country, they were sent out in during the day and told to come back with a bucket of blueberries. Like basically, if you have a bucket, they'll come back.
Well, you know what? One of my favorite desserts, I had discovered it maybe a year or two ago, was the blueberry grunt.
That's listen, this is something that it's not happening today, but if my nephew Dre was here, my brother Jamie's son, Dre is like, after every family gathering, there's always a bag of frozen blueberries in the refrigerator, and that's what we normally whip up.
Yeah, like, so blueberry grunt, for those of you who don't know, it's like this beautiful magical dessert, and it's super simple. It's kind of like, I guess, like a cobbler, right? So the blueberries are just like, they're I guess there's different methods, but they're kind of simmered together with a little bit of acid, like lemon and sugar, and then it just gets this sort of biscuit topping on it, and then it's like in a cast iron pan and then thrown in the oven. Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah, and it's the same. The dumplings that my mother would use for blueberry grunt would be the same recipe that she used for a stew. So, like if she was having a chicken, we were having chicken or beef stew. We never usually had it during the winter time, or sorry, the summer, but in the winter you needed those extra calories, and so people were a little hungrier. So as a comfort food, we'd get dumplings in our stews.
Okay, and so yeah, that's cool, because like the dumplings, I guess it's more that biscuit kind of topping, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I've seen that quite a bit. Again, so what I find is really interesting is sort of the parallel. So in Caribbean cooking as well, you would find, you'll find some sort of stew with dumplings inside. But it's like I've seen in the East Coast, more commonly, it's like the stew with like sort of a biscuit dumpling, but that commonality of that sort of stewed dish with like the biscuits or the dumplings as part of it, as that comfort food warming all one pot thing, seems to be something that's common.
Yeah, tea biscuits are really big in African Nova Scotian cuisine as well. Everyone has their own tea biscuit recipe. The one that I always follow is from this book. This is a book that it's called Cooking Up a Storm. It's a collection of recipes and memories to celebrate the 15th anniversary. It's a library in our community, a women's group that my mother belonged to. All of these, a lot of these ladies have passed on the back of the book, but they were a staple in our community. These were pillars of the community. And so this is a book that my mother would have purchased 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's something that I still use, just really simple recipes. And the tea biscuits. This is my recipe here for tea biscuits.
Okay. You know, yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because it's like, that's where all the knowledge and like the history remains. You mentioned your aunt was someone who did the preserving in the family. There's a few aunties who do that. I have a few aunties too, who I just, I tried to make, so we make gravy to go on top of whatever different meals. And I just kind of like solicited my aunt. I sent her a photo of my, we call it dry food. So it's just like boiled root vegetables and my gravy. So I sent her a photo to see, you know, like, did I do it? Did I do it? How did it come out? So she said it was good, but I told her, and I admitted, my gravy wasn't as nice as her gravy is. It's really good. So she said, post-COVID, and I'm holding you to that. I see you there, Auntie Gloria. I'm holding her to it. She said she's going to teach me how to make her gravy her way. And there's no recipe, right? Like, it's just kind of like, it's that feeling.
There's no feeling. The other thing I was going to mention is that there aren't like the meal that I prepared this evening. I didn't use a recipe, with the exception of the cornbread, which we altered just a little bit to cut some of the sugar out. But the tea biscuit recipe, that would have been probably one of a few cookbooks that my mother owned. The cookbooks that she did own were usually cookbooks from women's groups or from the church.
Well, and that's nice. So I love that idea of that passing down the recipes. And I'm sure even for those women to write those recipes down must have been like a challenge, right? Because they're so used to just cooking instinctually of something you've done over and over again. Yes,
it would have been something that it's by feel. And it's also by like what you have available as well. Quite often you have to improvise. Yeah. And so that's the one thing about African Nova Scotian cuisine. I can tell you, it's delicious. Like, it doesn't matter what we're cooking or what we have. And quite often we didn't have the best cuts of meat. Yeah. A lot of organ meats. I know on a Sunday, sometimes we would have beef tongue. I know growing up quite often we had like kidneys and gravy and liver at least once a month. And so we consumed meats that were inexpensive and available.
Yeah. And again, that's something that's really common. Like another parallel there is those inexpensive cuts. Oftentimes because it's what we could afford. Like, this is looking back historically amongst generations. So what could we could afford, and then what was available to us, because oftentimes we didn't get the, you know, like sort of the prime cuts of meats and things like that offered to us. So you know, it really points to the creativity and the resilience to especially women within our communities. So I really applaud and appreciate that, the resourcefulness of women cooks within the communities, being able to make so much out of so little for so many people.
Right. And so even fish cakes, as I was mixing the batter up, or the ingredients together, I used about a pound of salt cod before I soaked it. And then I kind of had to gauge, like, how many potato am I going to put in? So I boiled up a bunch of potato, and it's just maybe a little less than a 1-to-2 ratio. But I thought, you know, if you really had to feed a family, you could add a little more potato, or if you know you wanted a little bit more salt cod, you could change the ratio a bit. So that's one thing that, with the versatility of the recipes, that you can accommodate your family.
Yeah.
Or back in the day, probably at least 3 or 4 times a week, people would drop into the house to visit my mom.
Yeah.
So they come, she stayed at home and looked after children. And my dad went out to work, and quite often my Aunt Jen would drop down, a lady named Mary would drop down, Vivian Kike, and they would just sit at the kitchen table and just chat. And so if you're expecting more people for dinner, you had to make sure that you could make that meal stretch. Now, that doesn't happen today. You know, if someone's knocking on my door unexpectedly, I'm thinking, who's there? And I'm probably hiding, right?
It's amazing, like how cultures change. You know, it just speaks to community, and it speaks to the importance of community within most African Caribbean cultures and communities. Because just as you said, I know that I've heard similar stories from elders just talking about, going, passing by Miss So-and-so's house, and there's always a pot of something on that you can sit down and, like if you need a meal or just you going to go and chat and just hang out, you can always do that. It really speaks to sort of the common factors between cultures and communities.
Yeah, and things are so much different today. Like, I guess if you went to Cape Breton or some other places, rural places in Nova Scotia, it'd still be the custom. People would still be, popping by, and there'd always be a pot of tea, or you'd put a fresh pot of coffee on, and probably have some baked goods to welcome people into your home.
Mm-hmm. And that idea of just sort of, that welcoming space, and that hospitality, that there's something there for you, and then you can go and be welcome there, which is great. Yeah. So I know that in Nova Scotia, there's, can you share maybe a little bit about the history? So we know that, like we said in the beginning, how African Loyalists were told that they can obtain freedom for fighting in the war.
Yes.
And
so there were a few waves of immigration. Wave would have started with the Black Loyalists, and then in 1812, after the War of 1812, and then the Jamaican Maroons actually came after the Black Loyalists, and then there was a fourth wave, which was folks immigrated to Cape Breton Island to work in the steel mills, and those were people from Barbados. So there's a Bayesian community in Cape Breton, and they still have the sauce and the hot sauce and all those traditional type foods that you'd find in Barbados. They integrated it here, so we would have adopted that as well, or some of that. So we've been in this province for well over 400 years.
Yeah. And so that's interesting that you're saying like the different waves of immigration. And so my understanding is there's like quite there was like the most famous, I guess, or the most well-known community was Africville.
Well, that's just because of all the controversy over what had happened in that community being destroyed by government, by the city of Halifax. So that became like a high-profile community, and it was located on the periphery or on the margins of Halifax at the time. So at the time, Halifax, would have been obviously a lot smaller. So Africville is now one of those places that people are seeking out to live. The property is highly valued. It's on the peninsula. It's on the Bedford Basin. And so it's one of those places now that is encompassed within the city of Halifax. But back in the day, it would have been like on the outskirts.
Yeah.
But there are over 50 communities.
50,
Black.
okay.
Over 50. I think the last time I heard someone count, maybe 57. And of course, some of those through gentrification are, no longer as vital or vibrant. Sorry, as vibrant as they used to be.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting when you talk about the displacement of the community. Now, is that something that happened in other communities, or is that predominantly something that happened in Africville alone?
Oh no, it's I mean, the way that it happened in Africville was people were removed in a short period of time. They say relocated, but you know, that's a euphemism. That's they were actually, their houses were destroyed in the middle of the night. The church in Nova Scotia, the backbone and the one thing that kept everyone connected, even though there were 57 communities throughout the province, the one thing that kept us all connected was the African United Baptist Association.
Okay.
So the AUBA. So we, you know, honor and our churches, and you'll find a lot of people in Nova Scotia as African Nova Scotians. A lot of people have a Baptist foundation. Not everyone does, but a lot of people do. Most people, I'd say. And so our churches are highly, you know, respectable places, like in any community. And that church was torn down in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So once someone left their home would be destroyed immediately. People were moved out by city dump trucks. People weren't fairly compensated, not even close to being fairly compensated. That land now is, there's a replica of the church on that property. And Africville is such a great story because it's, even though the physical community isn't there anymore, the spirit of Africville lives on and will continue to live on. Every summer, there's a reunion on site, and people camp out, and the community celebrates, and they just welcome anyone to come for that weekend and just enjoy the culture and the food and the company. Yeah. So even though the community is no longer there, it lives on.
And so what's on that space right now? So you said that there's a replica of the church, but I guess it's not an active church that people can actually attend.
They have like special, like they have like the reunion and special events. It's a museum as well. Like, so okay. It's a museum. But for a while, shamefully, the city turned it into a dog park.
Okay.
So an off-leash dog park where people could take their dogs to run around off-leash. Like, it just hurts my heart to even say that. But
yeah. And then that was like a community that, like you said, that was vibrant, and then people were living there. They were doing life there. I understand there was lots of challenges in that space because that was all that was allowed to be given, and then it was then taken away as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of challenges. I mean, but Africville would have been similar to any rural community in New Brunswick or PEI or anywhere else where, you know, people might not have had access to the same amenities that you would in a city. But it was no different. There were beautiful homes there. There were homes there that needed repair, but it was no different in terms of its condition, with the exception of the amenities, the running water and all of these things that would have been allotted to everyone else within city boundaries, but stopped right at Africville.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a adage that says Africville begins where the pavement ends.
Right. Yeah. So I know I mentioned earlier that you're part of the Nova Scotia. Tell me if I'm getting the title right. The Nova Scotia Freedom School.
Yeah, African Scotian Freedom School.
Mm-hmm. African Nova Scotia Freedom School. And so now, can you share a little bit about sort of your role there, and is this some of the history that you share in that school?
So the African Nova Scotia Freedom School was founded actually this last year, 2020, in August. We welcomed 25 young folks, I think between the ages of, I think it was 12 and 18. And Richard Zellers from St. Mary's University, Karen Hudson, Malik Adams, Kim Kane, some folks in the community, educators. We got together and worked out a curriculum that was very specific to African Nova Scotian and African Nova Scotian culture and history.
Okay. So
we looked at, you know, after the whole George Floyd thing and the Black Lives Matter movement, we looked at, you know, politics and defunding the police and the history, who we are as African Nova Scotian people. We looked at leadership and what that looks like in the community. And then lastly, we looked at activism. Like, how can we now, move from this state of, just being aware to actually doing things, taking role in the community.
Okay. And so, so you said you had your sort of launch this past summer. And so, what was the reception like?
Oh, it was amazing. It was, we did a GoFundMe, and we managed to raise in a very short amount of time, like $20,000, and people are still contributing. There will be, God willing, a Freedom School again in 2021.
That's amazing. And I think it's really, really important, because what I'm kind of finding is that because a lot of our history isn't documented and recorded, whether it's through recipes, whether it's through like entire communities being displaced, whether it's the lack of representation sort of in like accounts of history, whatever the reason is, there's a lot of erasure that can happen, and those histories forgotten because of that.
Yeah, and for us as African Nova Scotians, so when I think about it, a lot of Black people in this province can state where they're from. You know what I mean? So you can say from Barbados, from Jamaica, you come from Ghana. As African people of African Nova Scotian descent, like, we can't really say that. Definitely without, now people are doing DNA tests, but we don't really know exactly. West Africa, most likely, but so I guess what I'm trying to say is this is our home. So when people ask where we're from, this is where we're from. We're from Nova Scotia.
Yeah. And you know what, that's a good point, because if you ask, so again, how, like we mentioned earlier, like how we look at things very, through very like Eurocentric space. And if someone, family heritage goes back, 7 generations, they're Canadian, like they just own the fact, like, I'm Canadian. And I find it interesting that it's not easily accepted that you are Black Nova Scotian, therefore you are Canadian. And it's like, it still has to be, but where are you from? And even that, even if that journey is like, okay, well, we have to, like to figure it out. I guess I'm just trying to say, you know what I mean? Like, why can't that be it? Like, why does it need to go beyond that? And you need to look back, because if you really do need to reach back 400 years, I think you can own where you are.
We take ownership. This is where we're all over the world, the diaspora, the African diaspora, but we refer to ourselves as Scotians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have, like I said, a long history, and which involves us either, leaving things behind, or things being taken away from us, or things being forgotten. And so that's one of the reasons, timer's going on, that it's so important for us to reclaim what we already own. So these recipes. So before I started, doing some writing and research on African Nova Scotian food, there wasn't a lot of information available out there. And I'm sure when you went to go search, you probably didn't come upon a whole lot of information.
No, it was very limited. Yeah.
It's very limited. So what I did was I decided to do some informal research and just start asking folks, like other, elders and people from other communities, are you eating the same? I was pretty sure, I knew that they were, but I just thought, let me just ask, are you eating the same type of things? If we were to have a booth at a multicultural festival, what would we serve? And this was the catalyst behind me talking about African Nova Scotian food and legitimizing it. Was if we went to, and I used to take my kids to, they're now 27 and almost 22, when I used to take them to the multicultural festival here in Halifax. Actually, it was on the Dartmouth side. Every year we went, and I can't lie, I went for food, right? Like, the food is absolutely amazing, food from all over the world. And we go to this festival, and I always wondered, like, what if there was an African Nova Scotian booth? If there was, what would we serve?
Mm-hmm.
We're eating some of the same foods, like the boiled dinners and the salt cod fish cakes and the baked beans. And we also, we have the curry chicken and the oxtails and all those other things that meld together. It's almost as though people were like, well, that's maritime food. That's not African Nova Scotian food. Well, that's Caribbean food. That's not African Nova Scotian food.
Right.
But it's about just the recipe. It's about the collection of recipes and the commonalities amongst the recipes and the ingredients. So what we did is we took what we knew and what we had, and we created these recipes that obviously had some kind of blood memory that we knew that these foods felt familiar to us.
Right. Okay. So I see that, do you have some samples you can show us right now, actually, as you're talking about food? And I hope everyone had their dinner already, because we can't smell, but we can see sort of what's going on over there. So I'm just curious to see the goodies that you have put together.
I'm just about to, I know people are probably hungry, so I'm about to throw some food down. Yeah, I heard my timer going off, so remind me to check that cornbread.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because, the baked beans and the cornbread are definitely very American, sort of Southern American. And I like what you're saying, kind of like just owning the idea of this mishmash of different foods is actually our foods. This is it. Yeah.
So you can see those? See those fish cakes looking so good and delicious? Yeah. So those are the fish cakes. And for the beans, so we talked about, the boiled dinner being a traditional Nova Scotian meal. But growing up, we had, instead of the corned beef, we had corned beef occasionally. And we had, they called it salt and riblets. That was my favorite. But quite often they were pigtails that went into your pickled pigtails, fresh pigtails, sometimes salted, that went into the boiled dinner.
Okay. Yeah, and that's something common that we do as well, like just using the pigtail as like something to season the food. So it might be a piece of pigtail that goes into the rice, or if you make a big pot of soup, you might use the pigtail as well just to season the soup if you didn't have access to a lot of meats. And then using pigtail, you mentioned South before. So South is South. I can't say it, is like a traditional food from Barbados. And you actually taught me something, because I did not know that was when the folks from Barbados actually came to Nova Scotia.
There's a community. There's a big community in Cape Breton. They came to work in the steel mills in Cape Breton.
And what year was that you had said?
That would have been in the early 1900s.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I had a friend who would participate in a lot of our programs. She had shared that part of her heritage was Bayesian, and we couldn't sort of figure out like how that was. And so now you just told us. So that would explain how her family was there. Yeah.
So the one thing they have, the one, I guess, advantage is that they have roots in another country that they can probably trace back.
Yeah.
Right. Unlike the rest of us.
Right. Okay. So, is it going back in?
Just for another 2 minutes.
Okay, a couple more minutes and cornbread is ready.
Yeah.
So so you told us about the fish cakes. Can you tell us about the baked beans? What kind of beans do you use, and how does that dish made? And how does it differ?
I've never used anything for baked beans, and neither did my mother, besides yellow eye.
What was that? Yellow
eye beans.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of like a medium-sized bean. And those are soaked overnight as well, and then gently boil for about 20 to 30 minutes till the skin start coming off. And then for that, we always have black strap molasses. That's big in the Black community as well. It has lots of iron, to eat. It's delicious, and that would quite often go on some type of like carb, like tea biscuits. So we
Mhm.
had blackstrap molasses, put a bit of ketchup in, some mustard goes in that, some finely diced onion. I put garlic, minced garlic in mine, but my mother never did.
Okay.
Um, she would also fry up pork scraps.
Yes, I was
And,
looking for that. I was looking for that.
and pork scraps, I didn't. What I've been doing lately, and it adds such a nice flavor because culture is always evolving, and so are recipes. So I add a ham hock to mine, smoked ham hock.
Nice.
That goes right in the middle, and that bad boy is like falling right off the bone in
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
So,
and
yeah.
then do you pull the meat apart and like fold it into the baked beans, or do you just eat it
We
separately, or
just
how does that work?
put it right in the center of the pot
Yeah.
and just let it do its magic, and it just falls off the bone, and whatever happens happens, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you'll get a spoonful of beans with some ham in it, I guess, for lack of a better term, ham
Yeah.
hock.
Yeah.
But yeah, I put that in. What else do I put in there? Little Worcestershire sauce. Actually said that. I usually have a hard time saying that word. And I'm just trying to think, what else did I put in there? Yeah, I did the mustard. My brother's over there, mustard. My brother Jamie is like the real cook of the family. I'm a baker.
Okay.
My mother was a baker. My daughter's a baker. One of my favorite, actually, quite a few of my my father's sisters were really good, just from scratch bakers. So that's what I really love to do.
Mhm.
But my brother, he's if we're having a family meal, he's the one that's usually doing the majority of the cooking, unless people are coming here.
So has he been there like coaching you this whole time?
Oh, he's being patient over there. No, this is something that I do. This is kind of my specialty. Is the baked beans I kind of took over from my mother once she passed.
Mhm.
That's something that I now do at family gatherings. Is if we're having baked beans, I'm usually the one making them. And
Okay.
this
So, and how did she share that recipe with you?
through osmosis, watching her, watching
Mhm.
very closely. I don't know, for some reason, my mother allowed me to experiment in the kitchen like at a very early age. I don't know why. Like I was not even 10 years old, and I was making cakes and not realizing I had to, put the sugar in it. And she just let me experiment in the kitchen with baking. She did the majority of cooking,
Yeah.
with the exception of Christmas dinner. Like my father would always do the turkey, and she
Mhm.
did the fixings. And then my father always did this thing called a night lunch,
Okay,
which is
what's that?
it's like a night snack. Like it's just a kind of a meal that you'd have after dinner was over, before bed.
Okay. I like his style. He's like, let's just make up a new meal.
We called it a night lunch, and quite often it was like things that he was familiar with growing up. So one of my favorite things that he would do, kind of as a night lunch, is fry up eels in a cast iron frying pan, and then
Okay.
it be in a gravy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then would you eat it with crackers, or what would you do?
Oh no, you'd eat it like with probably some potatoes or rice or something like that. It was a heavier meal, but we weren't eating it real late. But he was a deacon in the church, so he did a lot of pastoral work,
Okay.
which like kept him out quite late
Mhm.
sometimes. So my mother always, if he was late coming home for dinner, his plate would be, before the microwave days,
Yeah.
would be on the back of the stove with another plate like over it, like just staying warm for him.
Yeah.
So he'd come home, and then he'd be up late, doing his work, and I'd be in the kitchen with him, watching him make up these night lunches.
I love that. That whole concept is like actually brilliant. It's just
I think it might be something that a lot of people in Nova Scotia do. Like I
really.
think yeah. Nights
I like the
like my kids wouldn't go to bed unless, well, they're like, you owe me a night lunch. I'm not going anywhere, right? Not going first, but okay, kitchen's closed after 9, but they do get their night lunch.
they get their night lunch. I love it. I love it. I think that's great. I wish I was there with you having a glass of wine. I'm jealous. You have all this beautiful things cooking on the stove there, and then a nice glass of wine to wash it down.
And the cornbread is that's done perfectly. So that's hot, and I'll throw some butter on that and do up some beans. The beans look delicious. Now, and I did mention that, you know, recipes evolve, you know, culture evolves. So sometimes I'll usually stick to the traditional ingredients, but every once in a while I'll add a little bit of red wine, or you know what I mean, a little bit of nutmeg or a little something just to enhance it. And so I tried something a little different tonight with these baked beans. There was a little bit of red wine left over that I wasn't interested in drinking. I put it in with baked beans.
Oh man, she's going crazy now.
And not a lot, but you know what? It gave it that extra depth.
Yeah, exactly. It'll give it some nice richness. So can we see what the baked beans look like? Can you open up that pot and show us, or maybe put some in a bowl or something?
Yeah, I will put some in a bowl.
Yeah.
They look so good.
Yeah, you're making us all jealous right now. Okay, let's see what this looks like.
Are the baked beans. You see that?
They look good. There's a nice steaming pot. And so is this a meal? So you have the cornbread, the baked beans, the fish cakes, and the chow chow. Is this a meal that you would eat all together normally?
This would be like one of those kind of serve yourselves kind of meal, or everyone come out to the kitchen and find a spot. You know what I mean?
Right.
Find a spot to eat this. If it's on your lap, like I said, usually when I'm doing a meal like this, there are 30 of us here.
Right.
So it's basically everyone's spending for themselves. But that's what the can you see those beans?
Oh, they look great.
They look fantastic. And then there's this nice a part of the ham hock, and there's a big bone in there.
Yeah.
As well.
So there's gonna be tons of flavor in there.
Tons of flavor. So can you see that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Then, that looks good.
Then the big old bone that's in there as well.
So yeah. there's there's an expression that I don't even know if it's really a Bayesian expression or if it's my uncle's expression, but when it's so when someone when you make something and it looks good or it tastes good, you say it could eat. So that looks like it could eat.
You know, I just got the little nugget. I got a little piece of the ham hock in here, but the flavor, it's really smoky. But like I said, we'll usually add some kind of fat, the salt, the pork scraps, or bacon, like a nice cut of bacon would go in here as well.
Can you tilt the can you just tilt it over? Some people were saying they couldn't see. Yeah, so if you can just there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
They're the baked beans, baby.
Yeah. That looks great.
So good. So yeah, I'm gonna do you guys want okay, so I'm gonna serve some up.
Okay.
Got this my niece is here as well, but I don't know why you're saying you look good, girl. Come on camera.
Okay, it's time to eat. It's time to eat. Okay, so Wendie, I think what we can do now, while everyone is kind of getting they're getting some food, maybe we can see if there's any questions from the audience, from the participants. If anyone has any questions for Wendie, or questions about the meal, or about African Scotian culture, you can type in the chat, and you can type in the chat, and then what we'll do is we'll read out the questions. Hold on, there we go. Yeah, and so we can read out the questions if anyone has any questions. No? Right. Okay, so nothing right now. So, okay, so as people are kind of like putting their questions together, I noticed on your shirt, there's this like really beautiful design. And I understand that you are also an artist. Can you, is this something that, did you design that piece, or can you share a little bit about your art?
Yeah, so this piece is called the African Nova Scotian flag, and I've been working with a group called the Afrocentric Learning Institute
Okay.
over the last year, and a phenomenal group of intellects, and we're looking at piloting the first Afrocentric school here in Nova Scotia. So we had a couple pop-ups. Anyways, they were instrumental in helping to launch this flag to
Mm-hmm.
represent African Nova Scotian culture. And it launched on Monday, Flag Day in Canada, February 15th, it launched. And what overwhelmingly positive response from the community. And now what we're looking for is for people to like adopt this flag.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
And the symbol on it is called Sankofa, and it's an ancient Adinkra symbol out of West Africa.
mm-hmm.
And it means it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten.
Okay.
Which is very fitting for us as a people, like just going back and retrieving. It's usually seen as a bird with its head turned backwards, looking at an egg. And there are some other significant symbolisms in here as well. This is the a wave, which represents the ocean and our ancestors' journey across the Middle Passage and movement. And so it has some significance in terms of the colors, what the red stands for, blood and sacrifice, and the gold represents cultural richness, and then the green, growth and fertility.
Wow.
So it has a deeper meaning. I won't get into all the details, but I designed it in 2012 when my daughter came home and she was doing a project about African Nova Scotians, Mi'kmaq culture, and the Acadian culture here in Nova Scotia. And I realized at that point, where's our flag? We don't have a flag. The Mi'kmaq have a flag, the beautiful flag. The Acadians have a beautiful flag that they fly proudly. And I thought 400 years in this province, I think it's high time that we have a unifying symbol. So I went ahead and I did some research and designed it. And now we're just, we're putting it out there, and we're hoping that right now, like I said, the response is overwhelmingly positive. People are excited about adopting this flag.
Wow, that's great. And like you said, that the whole Sankofa is such a really powerful symbol. Just looking back so that you can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I do have some questions. Okay, so Wendie, I have a question from Shirley, and she's wondering, how did Nova Scotians keep these cultural ties to Africville? We here in Hogan's Alley, Vancouver, want to do the same thing in recipes published in press books of Vancouver Black culture. So I guess she's asking, like, how did you sort of retain the cultural ties of displaced communities?
Oh, well, people, so like I said, it doesn't matter where you are in the province. People tend to identify with their home communities. So in Nova Scotia, we're actually able, just by your last name, we're able to know usually where people are from. So whether we know if your last name is Marsman, you're probably from Hams Plains. And if you're a Willis, you may be from North Preston. And if you're a Collie, you could be from East Preston. My family comes from a little community in near the airport called the Old Guysborough Road. So it wasn't difficult. We've always kept our ties. That's never been the question. The culture's never been the question. My thing is that it's like legitimizing the culture to a point where we're now able to like canvass government for special protection under some of the policies that are, like, for instance, the Acadian culture has their own school board, and that's protected. So what we're looking to do is just like legitimize things to a point where we can now benefit from the things that other communities have benefited from for years.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that question, Shirley. I have another question from Shauna, and she's asking, what did the people do for work living in the community? I guess she might be referring back to when we were just talking about in Africville. She may be referring to that. You can say yes or no, Shauna, if that's what you're referring to. And so that question was just what did people do for work living in the community? So,
Well,
mhm,
a lot of labor. My father worked as a laborer. Here in Nova Scotia, because of some of the policies, folks weren't able to go to medical school, or they weren't even able to go to teachers college. They called it at the time the normal college, and Black people weren't permitted because there was, of course, segregation here. So
right.
a lot of folks worked labor jobs, and a lot of women in the community did something way before it was cool for women to work outside the home or even permitted, something called days work.
Okay.
And days work entailed Black women coming from communities outside on the peripheries, outside of towns, outside of cities. And the days work would be going to homes in the city and looking after white people's children, or cleaning their houses, or, cooking for them. So that's kind of what happened like earlier on, prior to things being desegregated. We were all very concentrated in communities outside of white communities.
Yeah.
So I actually grew up in the inner city, which was, public housing. I grew up, with white, and we had it was probably, I don't know, 60-40 Black community, and then white people lived there as well.
Okay.
Usually white people that couldn't afford anywhere else to live, right? Not necessarily by choice, but
Yeah. Thank you. And I know there was, because I believe like Jim Crow laws of racial segregation was really prominent in Nova Scotia.
You could not be found in a white neighborhood after dark, for instance. You'd have to make sure that if you were doing days work in a white community, a white neighborhood, you'd be gone by 6 o'clock.
Okay. And was that, and sort of, was there a fear behind that? If you were, what would happen if you were in a white community after hours?
You could be arrested and thrown in jail.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually not a lot has changed. So the cornbread is done as well. You see how yummy and fluffy that is. And I'm adding a little bit of, Gail, you want chow? Yes, please. Adding a little chow to that.
Beautiful. That looks so good. I have a fish cake question. We're going to come back to the segregation question, but I just have a fish cake question. So Faye's just wondering, potatoes and fish cakes, do you cook the potatoes first and then blend them in the batter?
Yes,
and then she had, so go ahead.
Yeah, you cook
a 3-part question. Yeah.
You cook your potatoes first. You don't want your potatoes you don't mash them. What I do is I break them up in a bowl, and then you have to mix them with your hands. You want, a few lumps in there. You don't want it too smooth. You want it to have some texture.
Yeah. Okay. And then she had a question, 2 more questions about the food. She was saying green tomato chow, is that fried green tomatoes? And then she had another question about beef tongue, and she wants to know, is that the same as our cow tongue in Jamaica?
Oh, I imagine it is. Yeah, it's just the beef tongue. We go back in the day when I grew up, there were probably 3 places you could go to get the butchers in the community. Where you get the cow tongue. Now you wouldn't be able to get it at the grocery store now, but there's still butchers that sell from the nose to the tail, and everything in between. I guess it would be. We would just have it almost like with our boiled dinner, and root vegetables are very popular, or in the African Nova Scotian culture. A lot of the land that was allocated to Black communities wasn't very fertile.
Right.
So there wasn't a whole lot you could grow, but you could definitely grow root vegetables. So you'd have the parsnips and the carrots and the turnips, very big in African Nova Scotian cuisine. And greens are huge too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's very similar to the Caribbean with the provision grounds that were allotted by plantation owners. So same thing, like a very like rugged sort of terrain, not very fertile ground that folks were given and to grow their own food. And so it was often very similar, like ground provisions would be. So sweet potatoes and yams and potato and um, like cassava and breadfruit. So all those kind of produce would be grown in those lands as well.
And they also would be something that you could store like over the winter.
Yeah.
So like my grandfather always had a cold cellar. Yeah. That my father had a pretty sizable garden, about a 30-minute drive from where we lived in the city. And my grandfather, like his homestead, and he'd go and farm there every summer, and store the vegetables in my grandfather's root cellar.
Yeah,
and use those through the winter.
And yeah, that's great. Okay, so I have a question from, well, she's making a comment, but I think you talked about it. She was asking about the symbol on the art piece. And I believe you said it was a Sankofa
right.
sort of symbol. And then you implemented like the wave and things in there.
Right. What was the question that she
was just asking, if it symbolizes anything specific within the culture.
Well, what it symbolizes is the past, the present, and the future. So it's the bird with its head looking backwards at an egg. And so just symbolizing that for us as African Nova Scotians, there are a lot of things that were forgotten or taken away from us. And it's not wrong to go back and for those things which you have forgotten to help propel you into the future.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and so from Kim, thank you, Wendie, for sharing. You're amazing. I joined a little late, so may have missed it, but she would love the cornbread recipe. So
that I can tell you what ingredients went into it.
Yeah, I think, Kim, you have to be standing over Wendie's shoulder to get the full cornbread recipe. But what I can
die for this cornbread is like look at it. It's so fluffy and light, and doesn't that look great?
Let's say, yeah, you can.
That looks solid.
Yeah, so good. Kyra, you want to have some?
I want to take mine.
You're gonna do. Oh, that's the thing. The other thing that is very common in African Nova Scotian culture is we like our to-go plates.
Oh,
yeah. Sometimes we get our to-go plate before we even eat the real food, the real dish. You know what I mean? So everyone's always taking leftovers home, and these are the type of foods like the baked beans can freeze easily. The fish cakes, you could have those, fry them up with an egg in the morning. So they're the type of things that really almost might even be better the next day.
Yeah.
So
that's funny because in Caribbean culture, we always have to take out containers also. So I feel you on that. There's always a takeout container.
We would do a couple of paper plates. We take 2 paper plates and put one on top of the other to cover our food over. And then you get what we call the Sobeys bags, or just a plastic shopping bag. And you tie that up, and that would be, you place that. It's funny, but I laughed the last time just before COVID, we all got together at my nephew's place, and everywhere you looked, like the microwave on top of the stove, on top of the fridge, were everyone's takeaway plates, right?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the takeout is real. You're right. Oftentimes people get their takeout container first and then eat the food just in case. So there's always some left. Okay, so I have a question from Christian, and the question is, do Nova Scotians recognize Black Scotians as true Scotians, or is there a disconnect there?
Do Black Scotians recognize?
Sorry, do Nova Scotians recognize Black Scotians as true Nova Scotians, or is there a disconnect?
Oh no, we're the real deal.
Yeah.
No, Black Scotians are Now, I never really hear white people from Nova Scotia refer to themselves as Scotians. It's something that you quite often hear people talk about that are away outside of Nova Scotia. They'll have a Scotian party, or
Right.
there's Scotian. So it's all of the Scotians getting together. And when we say Scotians, we mean African Nova Scotians.
Oh, okay.
And nowhere else where you find, like, I don't even know how you say it. Like, I always knew growing up that we were a unique group.
Mhm.
Because if you were Black from British Columbia, or Black from Alberta, or Black from PEI, there's, I don't even know, like a African British Columbian, I guess. Like, it's only here in Nova Scotia that we connect the motherland to the province, because
Right.
this, like, do you ever hear of the Gala people? I think so.
Yeah.
Like, I see a lot of parallels between us and them.
Okay.
Even with the language, and language being the cornerstone to culture.
Yeah.
Language cornerstone. And so I always kind of wrestle with that. Like, well, we don't have a language, I thought. And then I realized there's certain things that Scotians do that aren't verbal. But
Okay.
there's certain things we say, and there's certain ways that we move. And, like, you probably, this might sound familiar, is we can point to someone with our lips. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, we do that too.
You know what I mean? So there's certain things that we do, and it might be a word or two, or it might be a gesture, or it might be a slight kind of tilt of the head that means something. So the language is not necessarily always a
The nod when you walk in,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's the nod, right? When you're passing someone, you just do the what's up nod, right?
Yeah.
or like you said, the lip point.
Who are you talking about?
No.
So in Nova Scotia, you bring that up. In Nova Scotia, probably the most important protocol, the most important thing, the most important part of our culture is that you must speak to people when you see them.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
must. People will cut you off forever if they thought that you saw them and you didn't say hello.
Yeah. 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 That's true.
You know what? I see you. It's saying, I see you, I acknowledge you, you're important, hello.
Yeah.
And respectfully, especially the way we address our elders.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I just heard my dad telling my son this morning how when he comes into a room and you find someone there, make sure that you acknowledge that they are there and you say good evening, good morning, good afternoon, like you say something. I heard my dad just telling my son that today.
Well, he was, and yeah. So when we were young, we would have to address our, unlike today, we'd have to address our friends' parents by their, their last name. Hello, Mrs. Kane, Mrs. Paris. So when we went to go visit our friends, first thing you did before you even spoke to your friend, before you went up to the room, before you went down to the rec room, first thing you did is you went in that house and you go and say, hello, Mrs. Mantley, hello, Mrs. Kane. You address the adults in the house, and then you were good to go.
Yeah.
If you didn't do that, you probably would not be allowed back in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I have a few more questions. So I'm just gonna hop in here. So these are like two different people asked a similar question. So I'll just kind of read them both together. So Shauna was asking, when did segregation cease in Canada? And then Christian says, I feel terrible. I went to school in Canada, but I know nothing about the segregation that Black Scotians face. This should be taught. So more of a statement.
I mean, it would have been in line with the Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregation, 1954, and afterwards, probably up to the 60s. I know people now that are in their 60s that went to segregated schools.
Yeah.
So not that long.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think segregated schools. So with I'm just looking it up here, the Canadian Human Rights Act was passed in 1977. And so segregated schools ceased in 1983. So that's when they ceased. But you know what, if you're living in Ontario, the streaming that you find within the public school system is equivalent to segregation. Streaming meaning the kids get like sent into either academic or applied. And often there's like a racial connotation between whether you get sent to academic or applied. So, you know, that's sort of like a more passive approach to segregation, but it still exists and it's still very active. But officially it had ended in 1983, and it was practiced predominantly in schools in Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia the most. So that was that there. And then Faye's just saying thanks for answering her question before, Wendie. Oh, and then Sharon was she actually meant not the art that you have on your shirt. She was actually asking about the art on the wall that you have in the back. And so she was wondering if you painted that piece, because you said you were an artist.
I did, yeah. That's one of the pieces that I painted. I have a collection of art. I have a little studio in the home, and I've been doing art for about a decade now. It's mostly interpretive, symbolic art. So yeah, that's one of my pieces there.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. I had noticed it earlier as well. Okay, a couple more questions or thoughts. So Christian again is just saying thanks for the insight, Wendie. Your meals look delicious. It was great to get to know you and your culture. And Faye has said, when Dudley Law was alive and a Black activist in Toronto, many Caribbean Blacks said he did not represent them. Did Nova Scotians feel this way too? Faye, you're just educating me right now because I'm a little bit blank and I'm like, I don't know what this is. Are you familiar with Dudley Law?
No.
No, okay. So he was a Black activist in Toronto. So we're gonna have to do a little research, Faye, thank you. Or if there's something that you are able to share with us, that'd be great, because actually I'm not familiar.
So if I get a question like more like, do I represent like what African Nova Scotian culture is, and this is the food? Like, I'm speaking, and the thing is like my family, like I am as legitimate as it comes when it's in terms of African Nova Scotian, like both sides of the family, kind of not really knowing where we come from in terms of a place of origin, other than knowing that it's probably West Africa. So I just kind of speak to my experiences, and a African Nova Scotian who has authentic experiences. Like I, lived in different communities, but I grew up in a community that was very connected to the city as well as a rural community. So when what they call relocation happened in Africville, many of the families were moved to public housing, which is the public housing unit that I grew up in, which is Uniacke Square. So like some of my best friends, even to today, like it was very, very well entrenched and connected to that community.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I mentioned about something huge on the menu for us is we're on a peninsula, fish.
Yeah.
So we eat a lot of fish.
Yeah.
In Nova Scotia and in the African Nova Scotian culture.
Yeah. And I think our last question is, what is boiled dinner? That was a question. So what is boiled dinner?
That's a great question. So traditionally boiled dinner is cabbage, potato, turnip, parsnip, carrot. Did I say carrot?
No,
okay.
But yeah.
Carrot. And you put it in you find the biggest pot that you can get, a big stock pot, because it's a meal that we would, in my family, we only had it on a Sunday. It was a Sunday meal. Yeah. And the longer the flavors melded together, the more delicious it was. So that was one of those meals that was always better the next day. And we always had that with green tomato chow.
Is there meat in it?
Yeah, so the meat that you would add to that meal would be the pigtails or the salt riblets or the corned beef, if you were lucky enough to get that. That was probably the most expensive cut of meat that you use in a boiled dinner. And yeah, it's turnip, carrots, parsnips, root vegetables, and some kind of salted boiled meat. I always liked it better with sauerkraut.
Okay. Yeah.
My favorite combination was salt riblets and sauerkraut, that version of a boiled dinner.
I'll see. That sounds great. Yeah, that's similar to, I think I mentioned before, we have our dry food and gravy. So similar, just like all the boiled provisions. And then there's some kind of like gravy, or like you said, sometimes there's like pigtail or some kind of salted meat that's cooked with it. And then you just eat it like that.
And we always
And
have chow, and then as a condiment, a lot of people put mustard on it.
Yeah.
Oh, and Christian says, oh, it's similar to Jig's dinner. And it sounds like it. I think Jig's dinner is like the Newfoundland version.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they did pigtails in Newfoundland though. I'm pretty sure they did. I could be wrong about that.
Oh, I don't know. But yeah. So Christian's saying yeah, and he's not sure if it's if they had pigtails there, but all right, Wendie, you have
like a southern thing.
Sorry.
I think the pigtails were like a southern kind of addition to because a lot of the influences also come from the southern United States, where that's where we migrated from.
Yeah, so it's such a blend of culture. You can see the Caribbean influence, you can see the Southern influence, you can see the East Coast influence. And thank you so much for just taking the time today to talk to everybody and to share about this culture and to give us a little bit more insight into, like I said, what African Canadian food looks like as opposed to African American food. So it's really a mishmash of cultures. It shows that resiliency. It shows that that sort of just ability to make something out of nothing. And it was just absolutely amazing. Wendie, your pleasure. I really appreciate you coming and being on Food Stories with us today. You're getting some thank yous from some folks, and Thea saying thank you, Paula saying thank you. It was very informative. Okay. Christian's also saying thank you. So you're getting lots of thank you for your time. And only if we could be there to enjoy that dinner with you, it would just be perfect. Cheryl Lise is fabulous. And oh, you know what? As we're just hopping out, I'm going to ask Christina if you can just play a little bit more of that amazing music. So this is an artist that I just found out. So Wendie, I asked her, okay, what kind of music do you want to be ushered into? And she told me Cindy Cain. So Cindy, Cyndi Cain. So Cindy Cain is the artist that we heard when you're coming in. I'm asking Christina to cue her up one more time. We can go out with a little soul food that was playing. And you told me that she is a Scotian recording artist. Is that correct?
Writer. Her genre is neo soul, jazz. So
yeah,
you can find her.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, we found her on Spotify, and the music was absolutely amazing. And ironically, so when I first looked it up, there's also a country music singer whose name is Cindy Cain, but she spells it Cindi. Okay. And so I was like, oh, and that would have been fine. But I was like, I don't know. I don't think this is who she meant. So I went back and did another quick search and found the artist that you were referring to. So if anyone's looking for some really cool neo soul local Canadian music, Cindy Cain was absolutely like, it's just brilliant. Yeah. So amazing. Oh, and Cheryl Lee just shared the link to her, I guess her page or where you can find her, but she's on Spotify. I did find her there, and you can find her also on like, I guess on YouTube. You can find her there.
And she appropriately has a song called Soul Food.
Yes, Soul Food. Okay, oh, I think Christina's going to play us out. So everyone, thank you so much for joining Food Stories today. You can just kind of groove with us on the way out if you'd like. But otherwise, thank you. Have a great evening. And we'll see you next time. Beans and cornbread. Oh yeah, I'll let you know. You'll be well fed. Mama's in the kitchen making, shortening, yeah. Mama's in the kitchen making. Thank you, Wendie. Soul food, soul food, good old-fashioned soul food. Oh, soul food. This time when we dance it out, folks. All right.
Oxtail roti,
Oh yeah.
fish key, black-eyed peas, give you what you need. Mama's in the kitchen baking, shortening. Mama's in the kitchen baking. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned
Oh, the family's coming out.
and cornbread. I like them beans and cornbread. I like them beans and cornbread.
I want some of those beans and cornbread.
Beans and cornbread. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food. Good old-fashioned soul food, soul food.
Perfect. Everyone who is left, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Wendie, for being here. I just really appreciate all that you shared with us. And I feel like when Corona's over, I think we need to cook a meal together at some point. I feel that that needs to happen. All right, everyone, have a great night. Thank you so much. Thanks to Wendie. Thanks to the family. And we will catch you next time. And we'll see you again on Food Stories. Take care, everyone.